So, whatever happened to the classic 1975 animated series Return to the Planet of the Apes? Let's find out. Movies,
Music and monsters.
Hey guys, Dan Monroe here, talking about movies, music, and monsters. The Planet of the Apes cartoon. You know, honestly, I can't say that I was the biggest fan of this show as a kid, but I have gained somewhat of an appreciation for it in my older years, along with an understanding of its somewhat historical significance in the franchise. I remember as a kid reading in the TV guide that the animated Planet of the Apes series was coming, and I thought the idea was really kind of cool. I mean, I was already a huge fan of not only the movies, but also the live-action TV show, the Mego action figures, and those incredible Apes playsets. But sadly, this was just another one of those classic shows that, like many other shows back in the day, only got one season. You know, I always found it intriguing and a bit disappointing that the Apes movies were such huge financial and cultural successes. But for some reason, when it came to television, Planet of the Apes just couldn't cut it. In fact, just about everything apes-related stopped almost entirely in the late 1970s for almost 30 years. We had the movies, the TV show, the animated series, the Power records in 1974, and the amazing Marvel comic books, which were unbelievably awesome, and that was it. But why? Well, let's take a look and see what we can find out, starting with the animated series. In 1975, after the cancellation of the Apes live-action TV series, NBC and 20th Century Fox agreed to adapt Planet of the Apes into a Saturday morning animated series. The show was produced by, and I know I'm going to slaughter this name, Frelling Enterprises, as a 30-minute Saturday morning cartoon titled Return to the Planet of the Apes. The guy who was pretty much involved in the entire creative aspect of the show was named Doug Wildey. And if anybody over 50 recognizes that name, it's because he was the guy who co-created Jonny Quest. Oh man, Jonny Quest. Video on that coming soon? Stay tuned. It's kind of interesting and a little bit odd that when Doug Wildey was researching the franchise and coming up with story ideas for the cartoon, he only watched the first two movies, Planet and Beneath. Why? Not a clue. But that does pretty much explain why all the animated shows didn't have much of anything to do with the plots from Escape, Conquest, or Battle. Two really well-known Saturday morning writers named Joe Ruby and Ken Spears were basically drafted by CBS in an attempt to kickstart these scripts, which may, in the end, be one reason why these scripts ended up being pretty darn good. The show essentially concentrates on three astronauts, Bill Hudson, Jeff Allen, and Judy Franklin, who, one way or another, end up on a planet of mute humans, subterranean underdwellers, and talking apes. Damn, that dreaded Hassline curve strikes again. The original Apes movie took place in 3978, and this series apparently takes place in 3979, just 1 year after Taylor and Brent show up. But then again, Brent tells the skipper in Beneath that the year is 3955. I really can't see how that makes a lot of sense when the planet literally blew up in Beneath shortly after Taylor and Brent arrived. You want to literally drive yourself into an early grave? Google search Planet of the Apes timeline and watch your hair literally turn gray before your eyes. Disclaimer, I honestly don't recommend doing it, but if you have absolutely nothing to do for, say, the next 15 years, dive in and have fun. This time around, we did have the usual classic APES characters like Cornelius, Zira, General Urko, Dr. Zaius, and Nova, along with some new characters like Kraydor, the leader of the Underdwellers. This is really kind of cool, and I never knew this, but apparently Austin Stoker, who was the guy who voiced the astronaut Jeff Allen, was the same guy who played McDonald in Battle for the Planet of the Apes. How cool is that? And speaking of voices, Henry Corden, who did the voiceover in the opening credits and also the voice for General Urko in the show, was the second voice of Fred Flintstone. He took over for Fred Flintstone when Alan Reed, the original voice actor, died in 1977. Kinda cool. In the original Planet of the Apes film, the astronauts had the word ANSA on their flight suits because they didn't have the rights for it to say NASA. But apparently by the time this show rolled around, they got permission because their ship clearly says NASA. Why? I don't know. Lines are open, you decide. You know, one thing I remember as a kid while watching the show was, hey, where are all the guns? The apes have tanks and cannons and airplanes, but no guns. Well, the reason for that is actually pretty interesting, albeit perhaps a little strange. The network executives at the time made it very clear to the producers that on Saturday morning cartoons, children watching should never be exposed to any kind of weapon that they themselves could somehow ever get a hold of. God, network executives. So, even though the apes could wear rifles on their backs, they just couldn't use them. But on the flip side, obviously children at the age of 6 were never going to have access to tanks, cannons, or airplanes, so those were okay. But the guns, nope, gotta go. You know, believe it or not, the scripts for this show were really quite intelligently written with really detailed stories and quite a bit of continuity between the shows. Similar to the live-action TV show, each of the 13 episodes were generally self-contained as far as the story was concerned. There were some storylines that did weave in and out of this show, so if you want to make the best of watching this, you better make dang sure you watch them in order. This animated series borrowed not from the movies or the TV show, but mostly from the original novel. The apes in this show live in a more civilized society with televisions, radios, cars, airplanes, and boats. And for some reason, dragons. The Underdwellers in this show were obviously based on the mutants from beneath the Planet of the Apes, even though they were nowhere near as hostile or threatening to the astronauts as they were in the film. Nope, no bomb to blow up the planet this time. I already did a huge deep dive into whatever happened to the bomb from beneath the Planet of the Apes. Check it out. Link in the description. One thing I always did think was ridiculous and still do was the fact that they took historical figures from our time and swapped them into their time. William Ape Spear comes to mind, and the Ape Father rather than the Godfather. I don't know, I just thought that was kind of goofy, but it is what it is. Kind of cool. Other than Beneath the Planet of the Apes, this was the only other original Planet of the Apes production in which Roddy McDowall was not involved. And maybe it was the fact that the show had a low budget, which it did, but I always remember thinking that the animators clearly only put in enough animation to make any particular scene work. There really wasn't much animation in the show at all. I mean, the arms would move and the mouths would move, but it seemed like any chance they had to just stick in a static individual frame or pan the background from one side to another, they would just do that instead. But I guess that just gave it an individualistic style. right? However, the artwork in the show, specifically the extremely highly detailed backgrounds, were just incredible. There were so many shadows and shadings and a lot of the character designs and background elements that at times, to me, it really looked more like a well-drawn comic book than a Saturday morning cartoon. And in the end, after rewatching this show as an adult, I really do feel that this series did try, at least, to capture the tone of the live-action movies. Return to the Planet of the Apes premiered on September 6th, 1975, only until November 29th, 1975, giving us only one season of 13 episodes. And that was it. Gone. And why? Well, unfortunately, just bad ratings. Another swing and a miss for Planet of the Apes on network television. However, and this is really kind of interesting, NBC did consider producing a second season of only 3 episodes in an attempt to complete the story. How cool would that have been? But never happened. They just left our animated heroes out there in the same desperate situation that befell Land of the Lost, Lost in Space, and so many others. They just never got home. But despite the fact that the show had really low ratings and the critics absolutely hated it, you know what? The kids loved it. And that's why we, as big kids, we still love it too. Then, shortly after the cancellation of this show, 3 paperback novels were released called Visions from Nowhere, Escape from Terror Lagoon, and Man, the Hunted Animal. These were books based on the scripts from the animated series with way more adult themes. Well, I don't mean like adult themes. You know what I mean. All 13 of these really cool Planet of the Apes cartoons were released on DVD in October of 2006 in the Return to the Planet of the Apes Complete Animated Series Collection. And if you really want to watch any of them like right now, well, you can. You know, here in this whole place, just do a search up here, dive in, and have fun. Well, the animated series came and the animated series went, and even though it was a really long time before anything happened, this certainly wasn't the end of Planet of the Apes, I can tell you that. In the mid to late 2000s, we began hearing rumblings that Planet of the Apes might just be reborn into a brand new multi-million-dollar extravaganza with a big-time budget and a big-time director and even practical makeup effects. But that, my friends, is the topic of another video. I really hope you guys enjoyed that deep dive into the Planet of the Apes cartoon, and if you did and you like this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing. I've got a lot of new videos coming up that I know you guys are just going to dig. As always, if anybody has any questions, drop them down in the comments and I will try my best to answer them for you. And please, feel free to stop back anytime as we continue our conversation on movies, music, and monsters.
Movies, music, and monsters.